From a sister ship playing the doomed vessel to Hollywood royalty rejecting the lead role, the story behind The Perfect Storm is as dramatic as the 100-foot waves depicted on screen. The real Andrea Gail vanished into the Atlantic without a trace, yet its legend spawned bizarre behind-the-scenes tales, controversial lawsuits, and one very dedicated method actor who checked IDs at a Gloucester bar. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Perfect Storm's Andrea Gail. Fact 1. The ship's owner was nicknamed Suicide Brown. When you watch The Perfect Storm, you might notice the boat owner Bob Brown seems like a tough, no-nonsense businessman who pushes his captains hard to bring in bigger catches. What the movie doesn't tell you is that the real Robert Brown had earned one of the most ominous nicknames in Gloucester's fishing community long before the Andrea Gail ever set sail. Local fishermen knew him as Suicide Brown, a moniker that wasn't given lightly in a profession already known for its life-threatening dangers. Brown earned this dark nickname during his younger years as a fisherman himself, when he built a reputation for taking risks that other experienced sailors considered absolutely reckless. In the tight-knit world of Gloucester fishing, where generations of families had learned to respect the ocean's power, Brown stood out for his willingness to push boats and crews into conditions that more cautious captains would avoid. The fact that his fellow fishermen, people who routinely faced storms, massive waves, and freezing temperatures as part of their daily work, thought Brown's choices were suicidal, speaks volumes about just how far he was willing to go. Despite the warning contained in that nickname, Brown continued operating fishing vessels for decades, building a successful business that included both the Andrea Gail and her sister ship, the Hannah Bowden. He hired captains like Billy Tyne and Linda Greenlaw, expecting them to bring in profitable catches even when the fishing season grew late and dangerous weather patterns developed. The irony is impossible to ignore. A man nicknamed for his death-defying risks as a young fisherman became the owner whose vessel was lost in what meteorologists would later call a once-in-a-century storm. Brown had taken the Andrea Gail on dozens of successful trips before that final voyage in 1991, and the boat had always made it home safely under his ownership until the perfect combination of weather systems converged that October. Fact 2. Harrison Ford, Nicolas Cage, and Mel Gibson all rejected the captain role. Before George Clooney ever set foot on the Andrea Gail's deck, director Wolfgang Petersen had his heart set on some of Hollywood's biggest names to play Captain Billy Tyne, and every single one of them turned him down. The role of the tough, determined fishing boat captain who leads his crew into the storm of the century proved to be a surprisingly hard sell in the late 1990s, despite the film's massive budget and compelling true story at its core. Petersen's first choice was Harrison Ford, who was at the height of his action hero fame with films like Air Force One already under his belt. Ford had proven he could play authoritative captains and leaders, making him seem like the perfect fit for Billy Tyne. However, Ford declined the offer, and Petersen was forced to look elsewhere. The director then turned to Nicolas Cage, another major star who was riding high after winning an Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas just a few years earlier. Cage also passed on the opportunity, leaving Petersen scrambling to find his leading man. Mel Gibson became the third big name attached to the project, and for a moment it seemed like the role had finally found its star. But negotiations fell apart over money, with Gibson reportedly demanding far more than Warner Brothers was willing to pay for the role. The studio refused to meet his price, and Gibson walked away from The Perfect Storm. After 3 major rejections, George Clooney finally signed on to play Captain Billy Tyne. At the time, Clooney was still trying to establish himself as a serious movie star after the disappointment of Batman and Robin, and The Perfect Storm became a crucial test of his box office appeal. The film opened against Mel Gibson's The Patriot on 4th of July weekend in 2000, with both actors essentially going head-to-head. Clooney's Perfect Storm won the weekend with over $41 million, finally giving him the hit he desperately needed and proving that sometimes the fourth choice turns out to be the right one. Fact 3. The Sister Ship Lady. Grace played the Andrea Gail. When Hollywood set out to bring the tragic story of the Andrea Gail to the big screen in 2000, they faced an unusual problem that most filmmakers never encounter. The real Andrea Gail had vanished completely into the Atlantic Ocean during the perfect storm of 1991, taking all 6 crew members with her. and despite extensive searches covering over 186,000 square miles of ocean, neither the vessel nor any bodies were ever recovered. This meant the production team had no physical ship to film, no wreckage to reference, and no way to study the actual boat that Captain Billy Tyne had commanded on that fateful final voyage. The solution came from an unexpected source. The filmmakers discovered that the Andrea Gail had a sister ship called the Lady Grace, which had been built in the same year, 1978, and shared many of the same design features. Director Wolfgang Petersen and his team approached the owners of the Lady Grace with an offer to use the vessel as a stand-in for the doomed Andrea Gail, and after negotiations were completed, the Lady Grace became the star of the film's ocean sequences. The boat was outfitted to match the Andrea Gail's appearance as closely as possible, with the production team making modifications to ensure it looked authentic on camera. However, there was one notable difference that sharp-eyed viewers might catch. While the real Andrea Gail measured 72 feet in length, the Lady Grace was actually only 57 feet long, making her 15 feet shorter than the vessel she was portraying. Despite this size discrepancy, the Lady Grace performed admirably in her role, enduring the punishment of the massive water tank at Warner Brothers Studios and the various special effects that simulated the terrifying conditions of the perfect storm. After filming wrapped, Warner Brothers sold the Lady Grace, and the boat eventually found its way to maritime Gloucester, where it became a tourist attraction for fans of the film. The vessel that had portrayed one of the most famous fishing boats in cinema history continued to serve as a tangible connection to the story that had captivated audiences worldwide. Fact 4. Lady Grace later caught fire and was gutted. The boat that portrayed the doomed Andrea Gail in the 2000 movie met its own unfortunate fate more than a decade after the film wrapped. In August 2011, the Lady Grace, which had served as the on-screen stand-in for the famous fishing vessel, was gutted by fire while docked at Rose's Marine in Gloucester, Massachusetts. The irony wasn't lost on locals who had watched the ship survive Hollywood's recreated perfect storm only to be destroyed in a mundane accident years later. The Lady Grace was being fitted with new fishing gear to begin a second career as a scallop and clam vessel for the Harbor Loop seafood processor Intershell when disaster struck around 7:30 in the morning on August 3rd. 2 or 3 workers from Rose's Marine were using a blowtorch near the bow of the ship as part of the refitting process. The intense heat from the torch ignited materials inside the vessel, and the fire quickly spread throughout the 72-foot boat's interior. The flames consumed the pilot house and destroyed the crew quarters below deck, leaving the Lady Grace a burned-out shell of her former self. After filming concluded, the Lady Grace had been purchased by Maritime Gloucester and became something of a tourist attraction in the historic fishing town. The boat had been docked at the Gloucester Heritage Center for several years, where visitors could view the vessel that had played such a pivotal role in bringing their community's tragic story to the big screen. When plans to convert the ship into an educational harbor tour vessel or research boat fell through, it was eventually sold to Legal Seafoods, the Boston restaurant chain, and later to Intershell. Harriet Webster, executive director of the Heritage Center, noted that even after the boat moved from their pier, visitors continued to come by hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous vessel. The fire marked a sad end for a ship that had helped immortalize one of Gloucester's most devastating maritime losses, leaving behind only memories and the photographs taken during the movie's production. Fact 5. Mark Wahlberg actually lived in the real Bobby Shatford's room. When Mark Wahlberg signed on to play Bobby Shatford in The Perfect Storm, he didn't just study the role from a distance, he literally moved into the life his character had lived. Wahlberg stayed in Bobby Shatford's actual room, located above the Crow's Nest Bar in Gloucester, Massachusetts, the same place where the real Bobby had lived before his final voyage on the Andrea Gail. The Crow's Nest wasn't just any bar, it was owned by Bobby's mother, Ethel Shatford, and served as the central gathering place for the town's fishing community, making it the heart of the story both in real life and in the film. Wahlberg's immersion into Bobby's world went beyond simply sleeping in his room. The actor spent significant time getting to know the Shatford family personally, learning about Bobby's life, his personality, and what made him tick as both a fisherman and a person. In interviews, Wahlberg mentioned that he made it clear to the family that he wasn't trying to impersonate their son, but rather to portray a character who shared a similar experience during the same tragic event. This distinction was important to everyone involved, as the wounds from losing Bobby were still fresh, even years after the 1991 storm. But perhaps the most unusual part of Wahlberg's preparation came when he actually worked as a bouncer at the Crow's Nest one night during filming. The actor stood at the door checking identification cards for patrons trying to enter the bar, blending into the local scene in a way few Hollywood stars would attempt. The cast members became fixtures at the establishment during production, with George Clooney and other actors frequently visiting. The bar owners later said that Wahlberg and the rest of the cast were there all the time, treating the Crow's Nest as their home base while filming in Gloucester. This level of dedication to understanding the world Bobby Shatford came from helped Wahlberg deliver a performance that felt authentic to the fishing community that had lost one of their own. Fact 6. All the fish were animatronic robots. When you watch The Perfect Storm, the swordfish being hauled onto the Andrea Gail look incredibly real, with their metallic skin glistening and their powerful bodies thrashing against the deck. The massive shark that crashes onto the boat during one memorable scene appears equally authentic, with its jaws snapping and tail whipping violently. But here's the surprising truth. Every single fish you see in the movie was completely fake. Warner Brothers didn't use a single real fish during the entire production, relying instead on sophisticated animatronic creatures that were designed and built specifically for the film. The animatronic swordfish were crafted with motorized tail fins that could flap on cue, creating the illusion of a freshly caught fish still fighting for its life. These mechanical props were so detailed that they fooled audiences into believing they were watching actual marine life, even though some critics noted that up close, the fish had a slightly stiff quality that made them look like they came from the frozen food section. The shark was an even more impressive piece of engineering, built to thrash around convincingly on the deck of the Andrea Gail with gnashing teeth and realistic movement. The production team went to great lengths to make these animatronic animals appear as lifelike as possible, understanding that the fishing scenes needed to feel authentic for the story to work. This decision to use only artificial fish meant that no real animals were harmed during filming, which earned the production praise from animal welfare organizations. The only actual animals that appeared in the movie were the seagulls shown flying in their natural habitat during the opening scenes and a dog that stood on the dock, both of which were filmed in completely safe conditions. The commitment to using animatronics for all the fish demonstrates how much Hollywood's special effects technology had advanced by 2000, allowing filmmakers to create convincing creatures without putting any living animals at risk or dealing with the unpredictable nature of working with real marine life on set. Fact 7. The shark's hidden platform was visible on screen. One of the most memorable moments in The Perfect Storm happens early in the film, when a massive shark gets tossed onto the deck of the Andrea Gail during rough seas, thrashing violently as Mark Wahlberg's character, Bobby Shatford, scrambles to avoid its snapping jaws. The scene was designed to show the dangerous and unpredictable nature of fishing in the North Atlantic, where even a routine catch can turn deadly in an instant. However, eagle-eyed viewers who watch closely during the shark attack sequence might notice something that breaks the illusion of this terrifying encounter. The mechanical platform holding up the animatronic shark is actually visible in certain shots. During the low-angle camera shots that look directly at the shark's head as it writhes around on the wet deck, the small platform that the robotic fish was mounted on can be spotted beneath it. This platform was necessary to operate the animatronic creature and make its movements look realistic, but the filmmakers apparently didn't catch this continuity error during post-production editing. The mistake is particularly noticeable in the shots where the camera is positioned at deck level, looking head-on at the thrashing shark. While most viewers watching the scene for the first time probably miss this detail because they're focused on the action and drama of the moment, it's one of those movie mistakes that becomes impossible to unsee once you know it's there. What makes this blooper especially ironic is that the production went to enormous lengths to make everything else in The Perfect Storm look as realistic as possible, spending millions of dollars on cutting-edge special effects and building the largest indoor water tank ever constructed at Warner Brothers Studios at that time. The film also used exclusively animatronic fish throughout the entire production to ensure no real animals were harmed, which was a significant achievement for a movie released in 2000. Yet despite all that attention to detail and the massive budget behind the visual effects, this one little platform managed to sneak into the final cut of the film, serving as a reminder that even Hollywood blockbusters aren't perfect. Fact 8. A record-breaking 100.7-foot wave was recorded. During the actual perfect storm of 1991, a weather buoy positioned off the coast of Nova Scotia recorded something that meteorologists had never seen before in those waters, a wave that measured 100.7 feet tall. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of a 10-story building made entirely of moving water, and it remains the highest wave ever recorded in Nova Scotia's offshore waters to this day. This measurement wasn't just some random spike in the data either. It represented the absolute peak of what happens when three separate storm systems collide over the Atlantic Ocean, creating conditions that sailors describe as the stuff of nightmares. The buoy that captured this measurement was part of a network of weather monitoring stations positioned throughout the North Atlantic. And while author Sebastian Junger reported in his book that the storm created waves exceeding 100 feet in height, many people assumed this was dramatic exaggeration for storytelling purposes. However, the buoy data proved that Junger's claims were actually backed up by hard scientific evidence, and in some areas, the waves may have been even more massive than what the instruments could accurately measure. What makes this particular measurement so significant is that ocean buoys in the general vicinity of the Andrea Gail's last known position recorded peak wave action consistently exceeding 60 feet in height over a 3-day period from October 28th through October 30th of 1991, meaning the crew of the Andrea Gail would have been facing continuous punishment from waves that were taller than their entire 72-foot vessel. The 100.7-foot wave recorded off Nova Scotia wasn't just a freak occurrence. It was part of a sustained pattern of absolutely devastating sea conditions that modern meteorologists still study as an example of the ocean's raw power. When people watch the movie and see those massive CGI waves crashing over the Andrea Gail, they're actually looking at a reasonably accurate representation of what the real crew faced, which makes the film's storm sequences less Hollywood exaggeration and more terrifying documentary recreation. Fact 9. The Andrea Gail's modifications may have doomed it. While the perfect storm itself was undeniably powerful, there's a haunting possibility that the Andrea Gail's own modifications might have sealed its fate. Richard Haworth, who captained the Andrea Gail for 8 years before Billy Tyne took over, served as a script consultant for the 2000 film and shared a disturbing theory about what really happened to the vessel. Based on his extensive experience aboard the ship, Haworth believed that alterations made to the boat created a fatal weakness that became deadly when the storm hit. Haworth explained that the Andrea Gail had a dangerous tendency to take on massive amounts of water when the hold was fully loaded with fish and fuel. The deck would ride dangerously close to the waterline under these conditions, which was already a serious problem. But the real issue came from weather siding that had been added to the ship's port side. Weather siding is essentially an extra layer of protective boarding attached to the exterior of a vessel, and while it's meant to help shield the ship from harsh conditions, in this case it appears to have had the opposite effect. According to Haworth's analysis, this weather siding prevented water from draining off the deck quickly enough. Instead of flowing back into the ocean, seawater became trapped on the deck as waves crashed over the Andrea Gail. When the storm hit with its 70 to 100-foot waves, this trapped water added enormous weight to one side of the already heavily loaded vessel. Haworth theorized that as the waves grew rougher and more violent, all that trapped water caused the boat to rock harder and harder, eventually forcing it to heave dramatically to one side before toppling over and capsizing. Another fisherman named Jack Flaherty offered an additional theory that the vessel's fuel might have been contaminated with rust, algae, sediment, or even air bubbles, which could have caused complete engine failure at the worst possible moment, leaving the Andrea Gail powerless and adrift in the massive waves. The combination of these mechanical vulnerabilities with the unprecedented storm conditions may have made the ship's fate unavoidable. Fact 10. The emergency beacon's switch position remains a mystery. When the Andrea Gail vanished into the North Atlantic during the perfect storm of 1991, searchers desperately hoped to find any trace of the vessel or its six-man crew. On November 6, 1991, more than a week after the ship's last radio contact, a discovery was made on the remote shores of Sable Island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The Andrea Gail's emergency position indicating radio beacon, known as an EPIRB, had washed ashore on the sandy beach, providing the first physical evidence that the ship had indeed gone down somewhere in the treacherous waters of the Atlantic. An EPIRB is designed to be a fishing vessel's last line of defense in a catastrophic emergency, automatically activating when it contacts seawater to transmit a distress signal that can be picked up by satellites and rescue authorities. When Canadian Coast Guard personnel recovered the Andrea Gail's beacon from Sable Island, they faced a puzzling and ultimately unsolvable mystery. They could not conclusively determine whether the control switch on the device was in the on or off position when they found it. This seemingly small technical detail carried enormous implications for understanding what happened during the ship's final moments. If the beacon had been switched on, it should have transmitted an automatic distress signal the moment the Andrea Gail began taking on water or capsized, potentially alerting Coast Guard rescue teams to the vessel's location. However, no distress signal was ever received from the Andrea Gail's EPIRB during the storm. The ambiguity about the switch position left investigators and the victims' families with haunting questions. Had the beacon been turned off, preventing any signal from being sent? Had it malfunctioned despite being activated? Or had the violence of the storm and the ship sinking somehow damaged the device before it could perform its life-saving function? The uncertainty surrounding this single piece of equipment meant that searchers never knew the Andrea Gail's exact location when it went down, and rescue teams were never able to mount a timely response. To this day, neither the ship nor any of the 6 crew members have ever been recovered from the ocean floor. Fact 11. Sebastian Junger got a $35,000 advance for a single chapter. Before The Perfect Storm became a New York Times bestseller and a blockbuster Hollywood film, author Sebastian Junger had much humbler ambitions for the story of the Andrea Gail. At 29 years old, Junger was working as a tree climber for a tree removal company in Gloucester, Massachusetts, while also freelancing as a writer on the side. He wasn't yet the acclaimed war correspondent and filmmaker he would later become, but he had developed a fascination with dangerous occupations and the people who risked their lives to make a living. Junger's original plan was to write a book about various hazardous jobs, exploring the psychology and reality of people who worked in high-risk professions. The Andrea Gail tragedy, which had occurred in 1991 and deeply affected the Gloucester community where he lived and worked, seemed like perfect material for just one chapter of this larger project. He began researching the lost fishing vessel and interviewing family members of the crew, gathering details about their final voyage and the catastrophic storm that claimed their lives. After completing what he intended to be a single chapter, Junger sent his work to his literary agent, hoping to generate interest in the broader book concept. What happened next changed everything. The agent recognized that the Andrea Gail story had far more potential than just a chapter in an anthology about dangerous jobs. The emotional depth, the meteorological drama, and the human tragedy combined to create something truly compelling. The agent negotiated a deal that paid Junger a $35,000 advance to expand that single chapter into an entire book dedicated solely to the Andrea Gail and the perfect storm. That advance gave Junger the financial freedom to commit fully to researching and writing what would become his breakthrough work. He spent extensive time in Gloucester, deepening his relationships with the families of the lost crew members and meticulously researching everything from fishing boat operations to the science of storms. The result was The Perfect Storm, published in 1997, which not only became a massive commercial success, but also launched Junger's career as one of America's most respected nonfiction authors. Fact 12. The film used the largest water tank ever built at Warner Brothers, Creating the massive storm sequences for The Perfect Storm required filmmakers to construct something truly unprecedented at Warner Bros. Studios. Production designer John Fraser and his team built a 20-foot deep water tank on Stage 16 that became the largest indoor water tank ever constructed at the studio up to that point in 2000. The sheer scale of this engineering feat allowed the crew to safely simulate the terrifying conditions of the 1991 Perfect Storm without putting actors and crew members at risk in the actual ocean. At the heart of this massive tank sat an impressive 6-axis hydraulic motion base, which sounds incredibly technical, but basically means the platform could move in every direction imaginable. This sophisticated gimbal system could pitch, roll, yaw, and tilt the full-scale Andrea Gail mock-up in ways that mimicked how a real fishing vessel would react to towering waves and hurricane-force winds. Special effects supervisor John Fraser later recalled that his team had to constantly build more and more water sprayers throughout filming because director Wolfgang Petersen kept demanding additional ones to make the storm look even more intense. By the end of production, sprayers seemed to be everywhere on the set, with crew members working nights to fabricate new ones. The tank also featured massive dump tanks positioned above the set that could release thousands of gallons of water at once onto the ship and actors below, creating the effect of waves crashing over the deck. For the sailboat scenes involving the Mistral, Fraser's team added an extra hydraulic cylinder to the gimbal setup, so the boat could lean over an additional 25 degrees to one side, making it look like the vessel was about to topple completely over. Combined with camera angles that added another 15 degrees of tilt, the effect was absolutely convincing. Despite all this high-tech equipment filling the tank, the filmmakers still couldn't create actual rolling waves like you'd see in the open ocean, so those realistic wave movements had to be added later using groundbreaking computer-generated imagery from Industrial Light and Magic. Fact 13. Families of 2 crew members sued Warner Bros. When The Perfect Storm hit theaters in June of 2000, it became a massive box office success, earning over $328 million worldwide. But not everyone was happy with how the film portrayed the tragic events of 1991. The families of Captain Billy Tyne and crew member Dale Murphy were so upset by the movie's depiction of their loved ones that they filed lawsuits against Warner Bros., claiming the studio had damaged the men's reputations through unauthorized fictionalization of events. The Tyne family's lawsuit specifically accused the filmmakers of portraying Captain Billy Tyne as reckless and incompetent, suggesting he knowingly sailed his crew into a deadly storm despite warnings. In reality, Billy Tyne was an experienced captain who had successfully navigated dangerous waters for years, and his family argued that the film's dramatic liberties unfairly tarnished his legacy. The Murphy family filed similar complaints, alleging that Warner Bros. Used the crew members' names and likenesses without permission and altered facts to create a more dramatic narrative for Hollywood audiences. Warner Bros. Defended themselves by arguing that the law did not require them to obtain permission to depict what they considered a historically important event. The studio maintained that filmmakers have First Amendment rights to tell stories based on real events, even if those stories involve speculation and creative interpretation. This became especially important because nobody knows exactly what happened aboard the Andrea Gail after its last radio contact, since the boat and all 6 crew members were never found. The legal battle eventually reached the Florida Supreme Court, which ruled against the Tyne family by a vote of 6-2 in May of 2002. Additional unnamed families also sued in federal district court, but those cases were dismissed as well, with judges determining that the filmmakers' free speech rights outweighed the families' privacy concerns. Interestingly, the families had much less issue with Sebastian Junger's original book, which they felt treated the story with more respect and accuracy, even though both the book and movie involved reconstructing events that could never be fully verified. Fact 14. The broken ice machine forced the fatal decision. The Andrea Gail's fate might have been sealed not by the storm itself, but by a simple mechanical failure that happened days before the crew ever encountered rough weather. When the ship's ice machine broke down while they were out at sea, it created a ticking clock that would ultimately pressure Captain Billy Tyne into making the deadliest decision of his career. Commercial fishing boats like the Andrea Gail relied on ice machines to keep their catch fresh during the long weeks spent hundreds of miles from port. These machines were notoriously difficult to maintain on fishing vessels, and the Andrea Gails had been acting up for some time. When it finally quit working completely, the crew faced a serious problem. They had just successfully hauled in over 40,000 pounds of swordfish from the Flemish Cap, a fishing ground about 350 miles east of Newfoundland. This was exactly the kind of massive catch they had been hoping for, the kind that would make every crew member a substantial paycheck and salvage what had been a disappointing season. But without a functioning ice machine, that entire catch would spoil if they stayed at sea much longer. Fresh swordfish needs to be kept cold or it becomes worthless. The crew could see their payday literally rotting in the hold if they didn't get back to Gloucester quickly. This put Captain Tyne in an impossible situation. Weather reports were warning of dangerous conditions developing between the Andrea Gail and their home port. Under normal circumstances, an experienced captain like Tyne would have waited out the storm or taken a longer, safer route. He had decades of experience on the water and knew better than to rush into bad weather. Instead, the broken ice machine forced his hand. On October 27, 1991, Tyne made the call to head straight for home, knowing they would be sailing directly toward the converging storm systems. The choice was between losing their entire catch and income by waiting, or risking the journey through increasingly dangerous seas. He chose to go for it, and 3 days later, the Andrea Gail vanished. Fact 15. Captain Tyne's final words were, "She's comin' on strong." At around 6 o'clock in the evening, on October 28, 1991, Captain Billy Tyne made his last radio transmission from the Andrea Gail, and his final words would become one of the most haunting messages ever recorded at sea. Tyne was communicating with Captain Linda Greenlaw of the Hannah Bowden, the Andrea Gail's sister ship, which was owned by the same company and was also fishing in the North Atlantic that day. During this transmission, Tyne reported his coordinates as 44 degrees north and 56.4 degrees west, which placed the Andrea Gail about 162 miles east of Sable Island off the coast of Nova Scotia. He gave Greenlaw a weather report that painted an increasingly dire picture, describing 30-foot seas and wind gusts reaching up to 80 knots, which translates to about 92 miles per hour. As the conversation came to an end, Tyne's voice came through the radio with words that would echo through maritime history. "She's coming on, boys, and she's coming on strong." After that final transmission, the Andrea Gail went silent, and no one ever heard from the 6-man crew again. The timing of this last communication is particularly significant because it came just hours before the 3 storm systems fully converged into what would become known as the perfect storm, and weather buoys in the area would soon record wave heights exceeding 60 feet, with some reports indicating waves as high as 100 feet. The haunting simplicity of Tyne's final words captures the moment when an experienced captain realized the full magnitude of what they were facing, and those 10 words remain the last confirmed contact with the Andrea Gail and her crew, preserved forever in Coast Guard records as a chilling testament to the power of the ocean.